Welcome back. We were welcome. Welcome back to the day three of Pune International Literary Festival. We welcome Mona Verma in conversation with Chitra Bannerji Divakaruni. We will now begin our most awaited discussion, Independence. Chitra Bannerji Divakaruni is an Indian American author, poet, and the Betty and Jean McDevitt Professor of Writing at the University of Houston Creative Writing Program. Her short story book collection, Arranged Marriage, won an American Book Award in 1996. She is also the author of 20 books. Mona Verma, an award winning author of 8 works of fiction and over a dozen anthologies, listed as one of the 50 iconic authors 2022. She's been featured in the Incredible Women of India talk shows. Dateline Dehradun has listed her amongst the most prominent figures of the state of the UK for her contribution to literature. She co owns Disha, a corporate training firm. Her latest book, Divya Sutra, comprises of stories from the Purana. This discussion will be led by Mona Verma, and I now request her to begin this amazing session. Thank you.
Thank you, Richa. Today, I'm most honored to have with me the great Chitra Divakaruni, and we will be talking about this lovely book that she's written, Independence. This book is a complete page turner in more ways than one, because this book relates to various emotions that we have. This book is set at the turn of the 20th century, August 1946. August 1946 was the cusp of greatest tragedy that India saw, that followed a reckless pencil line drawn across the map of undivided India. This book talks about the talented and very intelligent Priya, the complex Jamini, the pretty Deepa, and Raza, and Amut, and the entire Ganguly household, and what happens to them after the direct action vote when the family patriarch is dead. This book raises many questions. It raises questions in the minds of those who have not witnessed the independence, because we do not know what were the horrors. We do not know about the stories that are never told, the stories that were never told in textbooks, because that is the history the younger generation knows. But that was not what the independence was all about in its totality. Independence was about the undocumented human narratives. It was not just the era from Warren Hastings to Mountbatten. It was about the stories of the people and their struggles, and the struggles when their integrity stood challenged, their struggles in the face of horror, their struggles in the face of tragedy. And a very strong message comes through this book, Independence. So, independence, according to this book, was not about a country sliced as though it was a cake, as a writer says. So, like the Mahabharata, my question now to the author is, so like the Mahabharata, do you think the independence was a personal war for all those people involved?
Thank you, Mona. What a great introduction. I'm so happy to be here at the Pune Literary Festival. I'm especially excited because this is the first online event I'm doing on independence since the book has just come out. And thank you for giving people a little peek into the book. You are so right that we think of history as, big events happening countrywide, but really for everyone who lived through that time, it was a very personal thing. They struggled, they suffered, they were inspired, they went on marches, they protested. Each one who was involved in that struggle, their lives were completely transformed by that struggle. Many survived and many did not. And this book, I hope, is what shall I say? It's a tribute to all of the people, especially what we consider the little people, the ordinary people, and especially the women who lived through independence. So, as you said, my book uh, deals with all of the major events of partition and independence and the terrible bloodshed as well. But it deals with them from the point of view of this one family, these three sisters, Priya, Jamini, and Deepa.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, ma'am. You know, when I was reading through the book, at one point you say that bereavement or loss resulting from the mindless communal rage is very different from the one which is a destined one, which fate brings upon a person. Why did you? I understand the how profound this line is, but why did you use this particular statement? In what context did you use it, and what made you think of something that is so deep, so insightful?
Thank you for that question. So, uh, two of the main characters in this novel are doctors. One is
Hmm.
a doctor father, he's been a doctor for a long time, and the other one is his daughter, Priya, who
Hmm.
just longs to be a doctor, just like her father.
Right.
And, as a doctor, they come across many illnesses, injuries, and even things leading to death. But
Hmm.
that Priya realizes when she is caught in the communal violence of Direct Action Day in 1946, she realizes that's a different kind of death. But the
Hmm.
death that happens because of hatred between people or hatred between communities or hatred between nations, that violence, that unnecessary suffering and death, she is just shocked by it because this is her first major exposure to that kind of death that happens when it comes out of conflict. And in the case of India, it came out of communal conflict, which was so disturbing and shocking to people because, you know, even the day before Direct Action Day in
Hmm.
Kolkata, Hindus and Muslims were living peacefully side by side.
Right.
And
Right.
then Direct Action Day happens and there's enormous killings. And that
Hmm.
is, Priya is just shocked by that. She is horrified and she
Hmm.
realizes that it's not natural. The other kind of death is natural. We grow old, we grow ill, we
Hmm.
get injured perhaps, and we die.
Hmm.
But this is not natural. This is man created death.
And it is not even expected. I mean,
Yes,
supposedly a riot breaks out in our city tomorrow, something that we did not even expect last year to have happened. And
so true.
when something like that happens and you aren't prepared for it, and the very suddenness of it is so cruel, and then you feel it's such a wasted death. The person could have lived, the person could have followed their dreams. And I think that adds to the tragedy of it. Any death is tragic, any loss is tragic, but I guess the suddenness of it and the very fact that it is so untimely makes it all the more tragic, which I understood when you wrote that. But for the benefit of our readers, I wanted you to speak about that.
Yes,
You've
thank
also,
you.
sorry,
Can I just say one more thing, which is that,
yes. Mhm.
as you said so correctly, um, people, many of our readers today, they were born into a free India, and how blessed is that? How wonderful is
Right,
that? But as
right.
a result, the horrors of what happened during independence, in my mind, the unnecessary horrors of all of the deaths during partition
Hmm.
was such a tragedy. And I
Hmm.
really wanted to bring that out.
Hmm.
Almost 1 million people died in
Yes,
the India, in what had been the undivided India during this partition. And one of the things that I really want to bring out in this book is how unnecessary were those deaths. Just like you
absolutely.
said, how tragic were those deaths?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I totally hear you when you say that. Having written on the same topic and having heard all those stories from my grandfather who came from Ghakkad Mandi in the Gujranwala district of Pakistan. So these stories were so raw, they were so moving, and it was not as if they were adulterated with some fantasy. because people who live the tragedy never adulterate their stories.
This is so true. My mother also, she lived through direct action day. She was in uh, Kolkata at that time. So I have also heard these stories from my grandfather and
Hmm.
my mother. And I
Hmm.
hope that in the book, I have managed to balance the
Hmm.
horrors of the deaths with the excitement of the new birth of the nation, because both things were going on at the
Of
same
course.
time.
Yes, yes. Like for before every end brings with it a new beginning. And it's not necessary that the beginning is joyful, because sometimes it also carries the burden of the end that it did not foresee, the tragic end that it did not expect. So it is such a mix, it is such a confluence, and it is very complex as well. You also state, ma'am, in the book that humankind without religion can do better for itself. Basically, it's Priya thinking to herself when she's reading about what's happening in India. And yet, I feel that as immigrants, we have a whole lot of family in London, in England. And whenever I visit them, I am given to understand that, they are bonding over the commonalities. Don't you think they become all the more sensitive to their native culture and ethical values when they are removed from it?
We it's a human thing, and this is true of the characters in the book also, that when we are, and this is something from my own life as well, because I lived in India for many years before I moved to the US for
Yes.
my graduate studies. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was in India, uh, my culture was all around me. I just took it for granted. I didn't really even think about it. But it was only after I moved to the US and I began to miss it so much. And I missed, the close family that honestly, when I'd been in India, I'd kind of been irritated by because they were, within the way of extended families in India, they were always into my business. They were always giving me advice. I didn't want any of that. But after I left, it
Huh.
was so important. I realized the love, I realized the power of an extended family, the way in which they can support us. And I really missed the culture of India. And I think that is really what made me into a writer, the desire to keep exploring the culture, the history, the mythology. And as you know, that has been my subject all through my many years of writing now. So this is also true of Priya, and we won't give away the story, but she will find herself outside of India when independence is happening. And then she becomes very keenly aware of the culture, the great excitement, but also the tragedy that's going on. She is like super connected to India, ironically, when she is physically most far away from it.
And that is such a relatable thing because we see that happening all around us. Over here in India, sometimes my family elders would tell me, shame on you, Mona, you don't do this. Look at your sister in England, she does all those things. Right? I mean, how she follows the culture during the navratras and stuff like that. But yes, I guess it becomes like the forbidden luxury of seeing the monsoons coming,
Yeah.
smelling the mud, smelling the earth before the monsoon arrives. It is the forbidden luxury of seeing a peacock dancing, of crow cawing, or seeing the mustard fields, or of the adrak chai. So all that becomes so important to us. That is the gold that we carry in our head as memories. So i
Yes,
i,
and
I can so
yeah,
truly relate to that.
thank you. And when I was a girl, I was very blessed because my grandfather lived in a village very much like the village in Independence. Now, the village in this novel is fictional, but it's geographically very much in the place where my grandfather's village was. So, a lot of the village scenes, as Priya and Deepa and Jamini go through their daily life in the village, which will get very disrupted after direct action day, but as they go through the village, I really brought up my own memories. as you were saying, very specific things. Mustard fields. The villages in Bengal are full of mustard fields,
Yes,
and
that's
the cranes in the little ponds everywhere.
true.
The bird fishing for little fish, and
Hmm.
all of that I've tried to really bring into the book to bring it alive. So that was a lot of joy for me to go back into the villages of my childhood.
Yes, I gather as much because for a good writer, ma'am, the sensory tactile imagery is very important to bring forth. What you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you sense, what you can touch, and what how does it feel to your touch? Is that is what leads the reader into the writer's world, and you've used it extensively in the book. And that is why we felt that we were carried into that era, carried into that household, into that shanty in which they were now forced to live, into Priya's world and into Jamini's world, and even into in Amit's household and even Raza's for that matter. All that.
Yes, I really wanted to bring into this book both Hindu and Muslim characters because
Yes.
that was very
Yes.
much the truth of the time of independence. Both Hindus and Muslims were very closely connected and very closely worked together to get independence. And I
Hmm.
just didn't want people to forget
Hmm.
that, we were one people striving towards a major goal, which is let's get the British out of India, let's
Hmm.
free this country, let's decolonize her. And that's so
Right.
important to remember at all times, but especially today, because there comes a time now. And I was so blessed that I was able to write this book and get it published in the 75th year of India's independence. I think that's very
Hmm.
significant. But we are forgetting, right? Because now it's a different generation. And it's kind of important to remember so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. That's one of the major, I think, lessons that history can teach us.
Ma'am, very, very well said. And I hear you here because what happens that in about 100 years, the entire thinking, there's a radical shift. For example, if my generation were to witness a partition, my next generation, my children will hear stories. They may not live through it, but they may not live that partition, but they hear stories from me. And what happens to my grandchildren? They won't even care unless and until somebody tells it to them.
Yes,
So,
so
and
true.
how many people are alive who witnessed this partition? I guess
Less
barely
each day,
2%.
right? Less each day.
Yes, less each day, barely 2%, I would say. And who
Yeah.
will tell their stories?
Right. No,
Who
that's
will
one of
tell
the
them?
reasons that writing
Yes.
this book was very, very important to me. There's another reason, which is that the book I wrote before this,
Hmm.
one moment, the book I wrote before this, The Last Queen,
Hmm. Yes.
is about the life of Maharani Jinda Kaur,
Yes.
wife of Maharaja Ranjit Singh.
Yes.
That was set in the 1800s, and especially the 1830s and 40s, when the British are very powerful in India. They're just taking over one kingdom after another.
Hmm.
Maharani Jinda fights very valiantly against them, but finally
Hmm.
they managed to take away, through treachery, the kingdom of Punjab as well.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's the time of the first independence war in 1857, which the British were called the Sepoy Mutiny, but now we
Hmm.
have named it correctly. But
Hmm.
it failed, right? So it was a very painful book for me to write in that context, that the failure of the Indians, the success of the British in taking over India. So it was really important for me to trace that movement to its end when
Hmm.
India finally becomes free and independent. And I think, for me, those two books, The Last Queen and Independence, form like a total. They form
Hmm.
like two ends of a very important national experience for us.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, certainly. It was a brilliant book, and I've read that one too. Right from the Palace of Illusions. That is the first time I fell in love with your pen. and followed it up to this, and never thought that one day I will be speaking to you. And this is, I'm so honored and humbled to be sharing the test with you. Also,
Thank
ma'am,
you. Thank you.
and ma'am, this book has many traditional Tagore songs, which is strewn into its narrative. And they add so much nostalgia and evocative depth to the plot. How did this idea come about that the songs should be used? Many people can do that, but not everybody does that. So, why did you want to use the songs per se?
Songs were very important during our independence movement. They
Hmm,
were one of the ways in which the people kept themselves inspired and motivated.
hmm,
They would sing these songs while marching, they would sing these songs in gatherings, they would sing them in their families, they would sing them secretly because the British outlawed a lot of these songs.
hmm,
Vande Mataram, for
hmm,
example,
hmm, hmm, hmm.
if you sang it and they heard, you could go to jail, you would suddenly get beaten up. Lots of
Yes.
terrible things would happen to you.
Hmm,
But we're
hmm.
forgetting. Again, that's something we're forgetting. Although I'm happy that in Bengal, at least, the tradition of Tagore songs continues. Rabindra
Yes.
Sangeet is still a big part of
Hmm,
our culture.
hmm,
But
hmm,
these songs were so inspiring that I
hmm,
really wanted to put them into the book because these are the songs that the three sisters would be hearing.
hmm, hmm,
They'd hear it on the radio, on the Indian radio, right?
hmm,
They would
hmm,
hear it on the Bengali radio. They would hear it. Their father was a freedom fighter. So they
hmm,
heard it around the house when he would sing. He tried to teach them these
hmm,
songs.
hmm,
And,
hmm.
one of them, two of the sisters, Deepa and Jamini, are actually wonderful singers. So this is going
Hmm,
to affect their lives.
hmm,
So I really wanted to bring those songs in. Plus, I grew up listening to those songs. My mother would tell me about these songs,
hmm,
especially marching and singing Tagore's Akla Chalo Re, which
hmm,
was one
hmm,
of Gandhiji's favorites also.
hmm.
It just, I felt it was so important to add texture to the novel by putting in these songs. And I'm very, very happy that my publisher, HarperCollins, has put a QR code inside the book.
Yes,
So
right.
if
Right.
people open the book, there's the QR code and you can go to the entire playlist. So I thought that was very nice. I asked them if they would do it and they went ahead and did it. And it's a very nice playlist that you can listen to as you are reading the book for, I think, a kind of multi-layered sensory experience. This
Yes,
is the
and
first of my books in which music like this is so important.
music is basically the pulse of any culture, for that matter, because all civilizations began as tribes, small tribes, people coming together, and what was basically binding them in a very profound way was music, dance, art in its own way, isn't it? So I guess that is why music has a very strong place, and something
Yes,
which is very.
especially Yes, especially in a people who are being repressed,
Hmm,
music begins to play a very important part. If we look at world history,
hmm,
we will see the same thing that there are songs of independence, songs of resistance, and they
hmm,
carry the people through the
hmm,
difficult times.
hmm,
There are scenes in this book, or there are memories, for
hmm,
example, of people who are largely forgotten now.
hmm,
Matangini Hazra,
hmm,
she is an older freedom
hmm,
fighter. She dies fighting for freedom. She's
hmm,
shot by
hmm,
the British, but she's
hmm.
singing until she dies. She's carrying the flag and she's singing. And I just wanted to put those things into the book so people would remember how many people sacrificed their lives
Yeah.
for this wonderful freedom that we now have in India. And we cannot take it for granted.
Yes, ma'am. And this suddenly reminds me. Yesterday, I was in conversation with another author, and she said that in the war in 1942, when many people came to India from Burma, and her mother, who was forced to burn all the wedding trousseau that she had collected over the years for her daughters, but what she didn't want to leave behind was a gramophone. because she
Yes,
said
yes.
that these are my roots. So I guess all of us, tend to water our roots through our culture, and what becomes major part of our culture, other songs, our art, etc. And coming back to the book, ma'am, all the characters are very complex. There are no easy characters in the book. They come across as very simple people, but they are very complex. And despite the fact that they have their very down moments and some very gray or very dark moments, they also exhibit their humanness at various points. How difficult was it for you to craft such characters? It's very difficult as an author, I could say.
Yes, it was a real challenge because, there were people of many generations that I was trying to show. So there
Hmm.
are the three sisters, uh,
Hmm.
Deepa, who was the beautiful one,
Hmm.
Priya, who is the one who has this deep desire to become a doctor, which is
Hmm.
very difficult for her at that time. There were
Hmm.
very few women doctors in India. And
Hmm.
in fact, in the Kolkata Medical School at that point, I mean, it
Hmm.
was a tough place to get into anyway, but women were banned. So she has this, they were not officially banned, but basically they were not allowed to be successful. So she
Right.
has this secret desire. And
Hmm.
then the sister Jamini, the middle
Hmm.
sister, who
Hmm.
is perhaps the most complex one, she
Absolutely.
is not as beautiful as Deepa. She is not as smart as Priya, but she also has her desires. She also wants, certain things out of life. What she has is the
Hmm.
ability to stitch beautiful kanthas. And
Yes.
kanthas become a big part of this book, which is why I'm so delighted that um, the whole cover was designed
Cover.
in kantha
Yes.
stitching. And it was
Yes.
actually a stitched cover, which then they
Hmm.
have put
Hmm.
on the book. And I love the fact that it's raised up and you can feel the stitches. But
Yes.
so, kantha stitching, the folk art of Bengal,
Hmm.
that was very important for Jamini and her mother. It's a way in which they come together. So, all of these characters, as you pointed out, were very difficult for me to write because I had to get their thinking process. Each one thinks in a different way. And I needed to make sure that, to the best extent that I could, that the thinking processes of the three women, the
Hmm.
way that what they want out of life is so different. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Totally.
independence happens, direct action day happens, their lives
Hmm.
change
Hmm.
completely, and now they want different things.
Hmm.
And now they begin to learn what it means to be independent. So it's
Yeah.
a country learning what is to be independent, but these three sisters are also learning it in their own lives. And that's how the history and personal lives, they intersect, the historical and the personal come together in this novel.
Yes, ma'am. And also, when you see the cover of the book, there is not just the kantha, and there is the conch shell, which is an auspicious symbol in India. There's a fish because it's about Bengal. There is the symbol of Islam, the holy Islam. There is the marigold, and there is a boat with, I guess, the three sisters in the river. And this is what you
Yes.
wanted to depict somehow. So the cover in itself is a book by itself. And
Yes,
my
and in that it is following the Kantha tradition because all Kanthas tell a story, right? They're
yes,
telling stories, especially of the village scenes in Bengal. And
hmm,
as you pointed out, that boat trip on the river is going to be a very important part of the novel.
of of the book. My son, who is a communication and a graphic designer, when he saw me reading this book over here in Pune, he picked it up, and for good 15 minutes his eyes were glued to the cover. And then I
Yes,
asked him, I said, "What are
happy
you
to
looking
know.
at?" And he said, "Wow," and simply wow, wow, wow. It is such a lovely cover and such a deep
Thank
one.
you.
It sets you
Thank
thinking.
you. I have to thank, Harper Collins, their team for even the back, I think, is so beautiful with the Kantha
Yes,
designs and the
yes,
front. And, the whole middle section, the
hmm,
fire, that's really
yeah,
important. Fire is going to become a
yes,
big, not only a symbol
Hmm.
but an actual plot element,
Yes.
because there was so much burning that was going on at that time.
Yes. Yes. Spike from
And I wanted
houses
to
to lives.
Yes, wanted to point out one more thing, which is what I think is unique about this book is there are very few books in English that deal with the partition that occurred in Bengal. As you
Hmm.
have said, there's a lot and very powerful things written about the partition that occurred in the Punjab region, but there's
Hmm.
not as much written in English about what happened in Bengal. So it was really important for me to write that story.
And what basically led to an East Bengal and a West Bengal. Yes, very
Right.
less written because, of course, it is there. And ma'am, also, you were speaking about the girls seeking their personal freedoms as well. So don't you think that, we are truly independent when we have the freedom to make a choice, to be free, to be physically free, but without the right to choose is not freedom. Is that the mainstay of all that this captivating and compelling book is all about?
Well, that is certainly one of the big themes of this book, that a true independence happens when independence happens within us also. And
Right.
especially since, my books are largely focused on women, it's very important in this book through the stories of the three sisters, we look at how independence is so important for women. And
Hmm.
just as you said, how can a country be truly independent if their women don't have the freedom to
To
choose
choose.
for themselves, how to live their lives, the values with which they will live their lives, the
Hmm.
work that they want to do, the careers that they want to have, what kind of education they want. These are some basic freedoms that everybody needs to have in a country, I feel, for the country to be uh, really independent in the deep sense of the word. It is
Hmm.
not easy, and especially in a country as large as India and as varied, with the urban areas being so different from the rural areas, people being of so many economic levels. I understand that it is a very complex thing, but it is a goal to strive for. It was a
Hmm.
goal to strive for in 1947 when Priya is trying over and over to get into a medical college. And it is a goal to strive for in a different way in
Hmm.
today's India.
Hmm.
So, I really do hope that readers will take that to heart. And the women have to ask themselves, the women in this novel, in Independence, have to ask themselves at a certain point, what
Hmm.
do I really want out of life?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once they figure out what they want out of life, there's a couple of other philosophical but also practical questions. Philosophical question is, why do I want this? And
Hmm.
the practical question is, how am I going to go about getting it?
Right.
And
Right.
so, this novel is really these three women figuring out these three kinds of questions.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, of course, it's depicted very explicitly in the book, and especially starts with Priya, who I'm not going to spill all the beans between Priya and Amit. That was a choice. So I guess, when women make choices, you are truly independent, you are truly free when you are not walking into a required change, you are walking into a desired change.
You've said it so well. I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. And, we can tell our readers a little bit about Priya and Amit. They have been dear friends through childhood. Their fathers are best friends. And
Yes.
Amit is much more clearly in love with Priya. Priya kind of comes to realize that as the story goes on, but she has to make a choice between the traditional life of a woman, being married to Amit, and between her desire for her career to be a doctor. And it's going to be a difficult choice. And I think I think I'm not wrong in saying that that is a choice that still many women are having to make. The personal life, the life
Yes.
of the role in the home as the homemaker, as the mother, as the wife, versus being a career woman. And one
Hmm.
of the things that Priya says at a certain point in the book is, why should women have to choose between these two things? If they
Yes.
want them both,
Hmm.
why should they not be allowed to have both?
And at the risk of being labeled when it comes to relationships versus a career in a very big way. And sadly, it's generally negative label. So, ma'am,
Yes.
coming back to the three sisters, it is such a compelling story of the three sisters, Priya, Jamini, and Deepa. Now, all these girls are radically different in terms of their behavior, in terms of their dreams and their aspirations, and they also face, unalike challenges thus. And what made you choose a plot line with three sisters, three women, considering that most of the time the stories that we've heard are around political upheavals that have always had men leading from the front.
And that is exactly why I wanted the three women in the center of the story. And,
Hmm.
that is part of that is anyway my project, my lifelong project,
Hmm.
is to bring women from the edges of the narrative and put them
Hmm.
right in the center. Let
Hmm.
us hear their voices, let us feel their feelings,
Hmm.
let us understand what they're thinking. I did that in Palace of Illusions with Draupadi. I did that
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
Forest of Enchantments with Sita.
See.
I did that in The Last Queen with Maharani Jinda. And
Hmm.
here in Independence, I'm trying to do it with the three sisters, Priya,
Hmm.
Jamini, Deepa, each one of them very different. They're a different portrait of womanhood and a different portrait of what they want out of this free country and a
Hmm.
different portrait of what independence means because they will learn what independence means. They will be independent in different ways, in very different ways by the end of the book. So
Hmm.
it's just a project of mine to bring women to the center. It's so important to tell women's stories. It is at
Hmm.
once, I think, true and inspiring because women are like at least half the population is women. If we don't tell their stories, how are we telling the stories of a country, of a nation, of a civilization, of a culture? We can't unless we tell the women's stories. And so that's always been a very important project of mine.
Yes.
And of course, I hope that both men and women will read the book because men need to understand, appreciate, and enjoy women's stories. This is so
Yes, of
important.
course.
For a long time, women have been reading the stories written by men. Is this
Hmm.
not true? Right? But
Absolutely.
men
Yes.
don't necessarily read the stories that are written by women and about women. They're like, oh, women's stories. No, women's stories are human stories. And it's
Hmm.
very important for us to remember that. We need to read each other's stories. Of course, I mean, my women readers are, I have to confess, my favorites. But I really, really love it when men read stories. And, over the years, many readers will write to me. And I especially love it when men and women read the stories together. Sometimes they're mothers and sons, sometimes
Hmm.
they're siblings reading the stories together.
Hmm.
Sometimes, people are reading it with their chosen partner. And
Hmm.
that just
Hmm.
makes me very happy because I think women's stories need to be read in this way, need to be read by men and women and then discussed.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Very well said. Because, see, earlier, as it is, most of the people who were writing stories, centuries ago, were generally men. And when women started writing stories, it is not only the men who opposed them, it was also the solvent, privileged women of the society also were ridiculing them. And therefore, these women, they were rattled and they were also writing stories, but they were writing stories from a man's point of view for quite some time until much later it is that they started rattling the spine of the society with their words, but it came much later because they faced opposition not only from men but also from women.
This is so true. And this is an important thing that we have to remember that
Yeah.
as women, it's so important for us to support other women, to
Yes.
support them in whatever way we can, and certainly to support the art that they create.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Certainly, certainly. And I think that's a huge responsibility we as women writers are hefting on our shoulders. And
Yes.
uh,
And we can
when,
only do it with the help of our readers, right?
of
Because
course,
what is a writer? A writer just puts out a book. Uh,
hmm,
She cannot do any more than that. So,
hmm,
I call on readers, I call on all these wonderful people who are coming to the literary festival in
hmm,
Pune that to think of their power, their influence
hmm,
by reading the right books, by talking about the right books, by
yeah,
sharing the right books with other people, they can
hmm,
really start changing the thought process of a nation. I do
hmm,
believe books are very powerful. Books have changed my life.
hmm,
So I
yes,
know that books are capable of doing that. So it is my hope that women will read and support the writings of other women or the art of other women in other areas and promote that, talk about it, so that it becomes
hmm,
something powerful in society. Of course, I want them to start with my books, but
hmm,
really, no, I'm talking about books by all women. I think it's
yeah,
really important to support them because women write from a slightly different point of view. And
of
through
course.
their women characters, they're depicting the world from a very unique point of view. And that point of view is precious.
Yeah, and everybody has a lens, one within the eye and one in the mind, right? It's like a Horns effect and the
Yes.
halo effect. Everybody has a lens, and we see things through our lens, and we see what we want to see. When I was writing, I was doing lots of research for my latest book, There Were Sutras, and I was researching on Parvati. And then, there's an instance which everybody knows about when Shiva beheads Vinaika, and then there's an elephant trunk, and of course we understand why an elephant trunk, why the north direction, what happened in between, but certainly we don't have time to discuss all that. One thing which always struck me, ma'am, was that, okay, now this boy, instead of Vinaika, this elephant boy is your son, Parvati. Did anyone ask Parvati a question whether she would love the boy in the same way? Wouldn't she seek the same eyes of her child? As mothers, what if somebody were to come and tell us that, okay, not this one, but this boy is your son now. So you got to love him with the same heart, with the same depth of emotion. Will you be able to? उससे किसी ने पूछा?
So
And she
true.
was a
So true.
goddess. She was a goddess who created the boy from her own mool Shakti. Did anyone ever
So
ask her? No one does. So we need to write. So that is why I wrote one story called Parvati's son. Never called him Vinayaka, never called him Ganesha. Parvati's son. So we need to lend them that voice, which is very important. We are running out of time, but there are so many questions I want to ask. And I have to ask you another one, which is about Deepa, when Deepa marries Raza. So once sedimented into the matrimony, and then there is the need and there is a pressure for conversion, which was almost like regimented upon her. And you write a very beautiful line over there, which is almost haunting. Can a man make up for the loss of culture, identity, and generations of tradition woven into her being? Somewhere your adaptation to life in America helps you write this part better.
yeah, I think so. Because, yeah, now that, Deepa falls in love with a Muslim
Hmm,
man, she will, her mother is very against it. Her mother is completely against it. So
hmm,
she has to choose between her family and her love. And I
hmm,
think, you know, some many women probably face this kind of, maybe not in Deepa's situation, but they face these difficult choices
hmm, hmm,
between one's family, one's culture, and whatever else one loves and wants.
hmm.
Certainly, I think, I had to. There was a point where I had to make a decision. Am I going to live in the US? Am I going to live in India? By then, my husband was very much uh, he was the US was the right place for him. So I had to make those choices. I think women are familiar with those choices. They have to
Yes.
make difficult choices in for example, in the story that you just depicted for us of Parvati and Shiva, I mean, she had to make a choice here. Shiva destroyed her son. She had to
Hmm.
make a choice. Am I going to continue with this person or am
Hmm.
I not? And now he
Hmm.
brings me this elephant headed child. Am I going to accept or am I not? So, yeah, important choices are always happening in every life. And in the lives of women, I think they become more complex because, especially historically, women have had less power to shape their lives.
Hmm.
Therefore, each choice they make becomes more important because if it's the wrong choice, it might impact their entire lives wrongly. And how do we know whether a choice is right or wrong? I think all of these three sisters will
Hmm.
have to question their choices and will have to weigh what they gained and what they lost by
Hmm.
making certain choices, either in a career wise or in their personal lives.
Yes, ma'am. And it's like when Priya makes her choice, you are made to understand that a woman's achievement is futile and almost like an error till it does not beget approval from others around her. So it must be diluted with consensus. Then only the society sees it as a good choice. And then coming to my favorite character in the book, and I guess this character is going to rattle many a mindset, is the Jamini. I call it the Germany. All along when I was reading the book, it's the most interesting character was the middle child. And also, as psychology tells us that it is very difficult being the middle child in the household. Because and she, just like as psychology tells us, taking it from there, is complex, unassuming, and raw. How difficult was it to write Germany?
Thank you for saying that. Jamini, the middle sister, was the most difficult for me to write
Hmm.
because of all these reasons that you mentioned, and also because her situation is a difficult one.
Hmm.
Deepa is her mother's favorite. The
Hmm.
youngest Priya is her father's favorite. Jamini is kind of, everyone is nice to her, but she knows she's nobody's favorite. So that becomes a real desire for her to be loved. And
Hmm.
Jamini is willing to do almost anything in order to be loved, including
Yes.
some wrong things. So
Snatching
I
power.
really liked writing that character, but it was very difficult. And
Very.
Jamini will also have one of the most harrowing experiences in,
Yes.
right around Independence time when there was so much rioting going on.
Right, right. And I mean, she fell prey to insanity, the mindless
Yes,
rage.
yes,
She
yes.
does. And ma'am, my last question to you, since we are running out of time, I wish this could go on and on and on. You are an immigrant and have been living in the US for some time now, as you just said, yet you approach Indian characters and subjects with an uncompromised ethos and unmatched prowess. Would you write the same books any differently had you been in India still?
That is such a difficult question, right? Because how I don't know what kind of person I would have been. Hopefully, same in many ways, but we are changed by our experiences. So if I had been in India, hopefully I would be writing books and hopefully they would still be about women. But I would probably be writing somewhat different books just because the world around me would have been so different. But I think I do believe that I would have focused on women just because that is so central to me. And I feel the importance of writing women's stories. I think I would still have written women's stories, but probably from a different angle.
Yes, yes, because where you're placed gives you a different view of things. This is certainly given. So I think that we have to wrap up our conversation here. Considering the paucity of time, they gave us 1 hour, but this 1 hour just flew by. And such interesting
It
book
did.
leading to such an
It did.
interesting conversation in which I learned so much. Generally, they say the
Thank you.
moderator reads the book and knows the book very well. But here, I was not just reading a book, I was learning. learning from a book. So when I open the book, the first page over here says something so beautiful, dear readers. And it says, here is a river, here is a village, here is a grand old mansion, here is the country that contains them all. And this is a book that contains it all. I would say this book contains all the nine rasas, all the nine emotions every human being can have. It has the Saundarya, it has the Veer, it has the Adbhut, it has the Bhai, and it has all the rasas. Thank you, Chitra Bannerji Divakaruni, for this wonderful conversation and for the lovely books you keep dishing out for us, which are basically such a repository, such a rich repository of tales for readers like all of us. Thank you, PILF. Thank you, Manjari Prabhu and team, for the wonderful opportunity today, not just to talk about this book, but also to speak with my favorite author, Chitra ma'am.
Thank you, Mona. It was a real pleasure to be here with PILF and with you. Thank you for reading the book so carefully and asking such wonderful questions. And I'm glad you pointed to those little portions that come before the sister story in each part. And I especially wanted to point our readers here to the very end, the postscript, because that postscript is directly, I won't read it. I hope people will read it on their own. It is directly addressed to today's reader.
Yeah.
And it really, I hope, brings out the fact that this is not just a story about old times. This is also our story today. And we need to make some decisions about how we will live our lives in the light of independence.
Be free to make a choice. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. It was most wonderful panel I've had in the longest time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading the book so carefully.
Thank you. Thank you. My honor, pleasure.
This was a truly refreshing and a beautiful session. Thank you so much, Chitra Bannerji Devakaruni and Mona Verma, for being PILF guests. It was a pleasure. And now our next conversation, yours truly, Anthony Horowitz, begins in 15 minutes with J.D. Barker and Jay Thorne in conversation with celebrity mystery writer Anthony Horowitz. Thank you so much.